Hello everyone. In this video today, we're going to learn how to make HTTP requests and display data from the API on our app. For that, we're going to start a new project. Let's create a new project here. Let's call it HTTP example. And let's create our project. For this HTTP example, we're gonna request some data from some API and we're gonna just display it on our app. So let's go to the main storyboard and let's put some UI components here. Let's put a label, Command-Shift-L, search for a label. Another label, just to display some data, and a button. Let's put all these items inside of a stack view, and let's give it some constraint, 40, 20, 20. Let's put alignment center for the labels, and let's give a spacing for our stack view of 20. Okay, let's just change the font of this one just to make it look a little different. Let's put it bold and size, let's say 20. Okay. And this one, let's make the size 30. Okay. Request data. Let's change the name of the button. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna request data from some API and we're gonna display on those two labels. So every time we press the button, we want to make that HTTP request and show that data inside of our labels. So let's connect our outlet to our view controller. So let's create it here, label title, control drag, label detail, and let's put an action for our button. Let's call it request data. Okay. Now we can start implementing the code to actually request the data. To request data from an API, we are going to use URLSession. That's a UI Xcode framework, Apple framework to manage requesting data from URLs. So let's create it here. To create it, we have to first create a URL. URL. And inside this URL, we're going to pass our string URL. It's going to be something like HTTP something. And we now create our request task. So let's create it. Let task equals URL session dot shared URLSession shared dot data task passing our URL. So here we pass our URL. And this function return 3 arguments. So the first one is the actual data returned for the response, and error. So here, before we using the data, we make sure the data is there. So to check that, we're gonna use a guard let data equals data else return. And here we're gonna have this data available. We want to convert it to a JSON so we can use it in our app. So let's create a JSON. Let JSON data equals. To convert that data type for a JSON object, we have to use JSON serialization. And we're gonna get an object, JSON object. So we pass the data inside of here. Options. We don't need options. Because this function can throw an error, we have to use a try in front of it. Try optional. And we want this type of the data to be as a dictionary on Swift. Is string any. So here in this JSON data, we're gonna have the data available to put inside of our labels. We don't have that ready yet, so we're gonna do that soon. And here we have to actually call this task to execute. So task.resume. Okay, so when we run this code, we're gonna have this URL ready, and we're gonna pass inside of this URLSession data task, and this is gonna make the request to this URL. And the response of that request, we're gonna get the data, make sure the data is there first, and convert that for a JSON object. Okay. Now, we are going to use a free API that's available for us just to demonstrate how it works. It's called Board API. They return, you just make a request and they return a random activity for you to do and a type of activity. Every time we make a request, they return a different activity. So just for our example, we're going to be using this code then. So what we want a URL, so we can put it here. And we want to be /activity. So when we convert our data to a JSON object, we're gonna have an object like this. So from here, what we wanna use is the activity and the type. So let's do that. We already have our JSON data here. So let's say let activity equals JSON data. And we're gonna grab that activity key as string and the type JSON data as string type. Okay, so here we have, let me just do this, the activity and type. We can actually now put that inside of our labels. So label title.text equals activity, label detail.text equals type. So now if we run our project, it's asking for self here, let me fix that. Self. if I run my project now, I should be able to request the data from this link and display that data inside of our labels. So let's press request the data. We see that there is a failure here. Okay. So there is something that's very important in iOS development is threads. So we have background threads, we have global threads, we have main thread. All the UI updating happens inside of a main thread. And requests like URLSession data task happens in the background task. So every time we make a background task and we're gonna update the UI, we need to go back to that thread, to the main thread, so you can update UI. To change the thread here, we have to use dispatch queue. So let's do a dispatch queue dot main dot async. Okay, so that request is happening because it's a iOS framework. It's happening in the background inside. I know that because it's saying it right here. So it's happening in the background. But every time we are updating the UI, we have to go back to the main one. And the way to do this here is using dispatch queue. So here, now that we're ready to update UI, we go back to the main thread, and if we run again, we should see the data from the API. If you press again, you should get another data. It's going to take a second. So every time I press, it's going to make another request and it's going to display another activity and the type of activity. So there you go. It's your first app actually requesting data from some API, making some HTTP requests. Thank you so much.